The story of Rome begins not with legions and emperors, but with the mud and reeds of the Tiber River, and a tale so deeply woven into the land that it became indistinguishable from fact. This was the age when history was half-whispered legend, and the fate of a world power rested in the jaws of a wolf. Long before the city's walls rose, the legend of Romulus and Remus took root. Born of the god Mars and the Vestal virgin Rhea Silvia, these twins were divine by birth, yet destined for a tragic earthly start. Cast adrift on the Tiber by a jealous, wicked uncle, the infants were miraculously saved. They were found by a sheave-off Lupa in a cave. The Lupercal suckled them, an image that would forever symbolize the raw, fierce nature of the nascent city. Later, a shepherd found and raised the boys. As they grew, they were marked by a commanding presence and an instinct for leadership, drawing crowds of fellow shepherds and runaway slaves to their cause. The brothers, learning of their royal lineage, decided to found a new city on the spot where they were saved. But ambition, Rome's greatest strength and fatal flaw, immediately divided them. Romulus favored the Palatine Hill, a defensible, central location. Remus chose the Aventine Hill. They sought a sign from the gods, watching the skies for birds in auspice. Remus first saw 6 vultures, but Romulus later saw 12. The quarrel over which sign was superior escalated into a deadly fury. In the ensuing fight, Romulus struck down his brother. Standing over the body, he is said to have uttered the city's first law, a chilling prophecy of its ruthless future. So perish every man who shall dare to leap over my walls. In 753 BC, according to later Roman historians, Romulus traced the boundary of his new city, Roma, on the Palatine Hill. Romulus, now king, faced a harsh reality. His city was a refuge of single, rootless men-bandits, exiles, and adventurers. It lacked women, and thus it lacked a future. To secure inhabitants, Romulus proclaimed Rome an asylum, offering sanctuary to all men, regardless of their past. Still, the surrounding tribes, especially the Sabines, refused to allow their daughters to marry these rough newcomers. In a move of audacious necessity, Romulus planned a great religious festival in honor of Neptune. When the neighboring families, including the Sabines, arrived, the Romans seized the opportunity. At a signal, they abducted the young, unmarried women, a brazen act known as the rape of the Sabine women. This act sparked immediate, bitter warfare. However, as the Sabine army was about to enter the citadel, the abducted women, who had now married their captors and borne their children, rushed onto the battlefield. They stood between their fathers and their new husbands, pleading for peace. Their courage and plea averted destruction and led to a unique compromise. The Romans and Sabines merged into a single people, sharing one city and one king, or rather, 2, as the Sabine king Tatius briefly ruled alongside Romulus. This consolidation of peoples proved a crucial early step in Rome's unique genius for absorbing and assimilating its rivals. The period following Romulus is shrouded in a mist of semi-legendary kings. Historians generally agree that 7 kings ruled Rome from the founding until 509 BC. Romulus established the core political framework, including the Senate, a council of elders. Subsequent kings solidified Rome's power over Latium. Numa Pompilius, the second king, established the core religious institutions, calendars, and priesthoods, civilizing the warlike Roman character. However, it was the influence of the powerful, advanced civilization to the north, the Etruscans, that truly accelerated Rome's transformation from a collection of hilltop villages into a true city. The last 3 kings, Tarquinius Priscus, Servius Tullius, and Tarquinius Superbus, were traditionally believed to be of Etruscan origin or heavily influenced by them. It was under the Etruscan kings that Rome saw monumental construction. The draining of the swampy Forum area to create a public space, the construction of the Circus Maximus for games, and the massive foundational walls and sewage system, the Cloaca Maxima. They brought architectural sophistication, military tactics, and perhaps even the alphabet. The rule of the final king, Tarquinius Superbus, Tarquin the Proud, marked the end of the monarchy. He ruled as a genuine tyrant, ignoring the Senate and oppressing the people. The final outrage came with the rape of the noblewoman Lucretia, by Tarquin's son, Sextus. Lucretia, in a devastating act of honor, took her own life after recounting the crime. This act, galvanized by the outrage of the people and led by a nobleman named Lucius Junius Brutus, sparked a revolt. The Roman people, horrified by the tyranny and the sexual violence of the monarch, expelled the entire royal family in 509 BC. They vowed never again to suffer the rule of a single absolute king. The age of monarchy was over, and the stage was set for the fierce, innovative, and expansionist era of the Roman Republic. The expulsion of Tarquin the Proud in 59 BC did not bring utopia to Rome. It merely traded the rule of one king for the rule of many powerful families. The Roman people, newly freed from monarchy, established a republic res publica, the public thing, an innovative system of governance designed to prevent the rise of another tyrant. Supreme authority was vested in two annually elected officials: the consuls, who possessed imperium, the power to command armies and enforce law, but crucially, could veto each other, and were accountable to the Senate and the assemblies. This was a system of checks and balances, yet in its earliest days, it was a system hijacked by the elite. The early republic was defined by an intense, centuries-long internal struggle known as the conflict of the orders, pitting the aristocratic patricians against the common citizens, the plebeians. The patricians, by birth and wealth, monopolized the Senate and all high political and religious offices. The plebeians, who formed the backbone of the army, the farms, and the growing crafts, found themselves disenfranchised, exploited, and often trapped in debilitating debt. The most powerful weapon of the plebeians was not a sword, but secession. In 494 BC, facing dire economic pressure and legal abuse, the plebeian soldiers simply marched out of the city and gathered on the sacred mount. Rome, surrounded by hostile tribes and desperate for its fighting men, was forced to negotiate. This strike resulted in the creation of the office of the tribune of the plebs. These were sacred, violable officials, meaning it was a religious offense to harm them, whose primary power was the right to veto any act of a magistrate or the Senate that was detrimental to a plebeian. The establishment of the tribunate was a revolutionary step, permanently embedding a populist counterpower within the heart of Rome's government. The struggle continued, largely because the law was unwritten, resting solely on the interpretation of patrician magistrates. This opaque system allowed for widespread abuse. The plebeians demanded a public written law code. After further political pressure, a board of 10 men decemvirs was appointed to draft this code. In 449 BC, the results were displayed on 12 bronze tablets in the Roman Forum, the Laws of the 12 Tables. This was Rome's first codified law. While not a completely egalitarian document, it still forbade marriage between patricians and plebeians, a law soon repealed. Its significance was immense. It ensured that all citizens, regardless of class, could know the law and be subject to the same procedural rules. No longer could a patrician magistrate hand down an arbitrary sentence based on secret custom. The 12 Tables became the bedrock of Roman jurisprudence and the foundational text that every schoolboy would memorize for centuries to come. The Roman Republic was thus not just forged by military might, but by the revolutionary principle of equality before a known law. While the internal struggle tempered Rome's government, external war hardened its state. The Republic's early history was a relentless series of conflicts against its neighbors: the Etruscans, the Latins, the Volsci, and the Aqui. The greatest challenge came from the Samnites, powerful, fierce mountain people who fought Rome across 3 protracted wars, 343 to 290 BC. These wars forced Rome to constantly innovate its military, developing the flexible, adaptive, manipular legion formation that replaced the rigid Greek-style phalanx. Rome's genius lay not just in fighting, but in incorporating the defeated. Unlike other ancient powers, Rome did not simply enslave its neighbors. It offered them treaties, land, and most importantly, citizenship, either full or partial sign suffragio, without the vote. This unique policy transformed rivals into allies, constantly replenishing Rome's manpower and creating a loyal, vested interest across the peninsula. When the Gauls sacked Rome in 390 BC, a disaster that shook the city to its core, it only intensified Rome's resolve and militarism. The final obstacle to complete peninsular dominance came from the wealthy Greek colonies in southern Italy, who called upon King Pyrrhus of Epirus for aid. Pyrrhus, a brilliant general, inflicted severe losses on the Romans, leading to the term Pyrrhic victory, a victory won at such a devastating cost that it is tantamount to defeat. Yet, for Rome, every victory, no matter the cost, was a step towards their ultimate goal. When Pyrrhus looked at the ceaseless stream of fresh Roman recruits, he reportedly remarked, "The Roman army is like the Hydra, cut off one head and to grow in its place." Exhausted by the Roman capacity to absorb losses, Pyrrhus withdrew. By 275 BC, Rome stood as the undisputed master of the entire Italian peninsula, poised on the edge of the Mediterranean, ready to confront the major world powers. The Republic had survived civil unrest, established the rule of law, and unified Italy through a combination of military genius and diplomatic inclusion. Its next chapter would see its armies cross the sea, setting up a clash of titans that would determine the fate of the entire known world. By the middle of the 3rd century BC, Rome had conquered the Italian peninsula, transforming from a regional power into a continental giant. But across a narrow strait of water, a vastly wealthier and older empire held sway. Carthage, founded by Phoenicians on the coast of North Africa, modern Tunisia. Carthage was a thalassocracia, see power with an immense merchant fleet, control over lucrative trade routes, and colonies stretching across Sicily, Sardinia, and Spain. When Rome's ambition, now unconfined, clashed with Carthaginian commercial dominance, a monumental conflict erupted, one that would redefine the geopolitical map of the ancient world. The rivalry ignited over Sicily, a strategic island caught between the two powers. In 264 BC, Rome launched its first major war beyond Italy. The challenge was immediate and severe. Rome was a land power, and Carthage was the queen of the sea. Rome knew it could not win without a navy, displaying the pragmatic genius and ferocious determination that characterized the Republic. The Romans captured a stranded Carthaginian warship and used it as a blueprint. They then built a massive fleet of 100 ships in a matter of months, training their land forces to row while the ships were still being constructed. To overcome the superior Carthaginian seamanship, the Romans invented the corvus, or crow. This heavy, spiked boarding bridge allowed Roman soldiers to grapple enemy ships and turn sea battles into land battles, effectively neutralizing Carthage's naval advantage. After 23 years of grinding conflict, Rome emerged victorious, forcing Carthage to cede Sicily, which became Rome's first true overseas province, marking the beginning of its extrapeninsular empire. The First Punic War bred deep resentment in Carthage, particularly in the Barcid family, led by Hamilcar Barca. Hamilcar forced his young son, Hannibal, to swear an eternal oath of hatred against Rome. This oath would unleash a torrent of destruction unmatched in Roman history. The Second Punic War, 218 to 201 BC, began with Hannibal's audacious act of crossing the Ebro River in Spain. Then, in one of the most astonishing military feats ever recorded, Hannibal led his vast army, including war elephants, cross the formidable Alps in the dead of winter. Though he lost thousands of men and most of his beasts, Hannibal emerged into Italy and began a 13-year campaign on Roman soil. Hannibal delivered 3 crushing defeats to the Romans: the Trebia River, 218 BC, Lake Trasimene, 217 BC, and, most devastatingly, Cannae, to 16 BC. At Cannae, Hannibal executed a brilliant double envelopment maneuver, allowing his center to give way before his flanks closed in, annihilating approximately 50,000 to 70,000 Roman soldiers, the single greatest loss in Rome's military history. The defeat shook the Republic to its core, but Rome refused to surrender, maintaining its policy of no negotiation with an enemy on Italian soil. They resorted to the Fabian strategy of harassment, avoiding direct confrontation, while Hannibal slowly ran out of resources. Rome found its answer to Hannibal in Publius Cornelius Scipio, later known as Africanus, a brilliant young commander who had survived Cannae. Scipio was convinced the war could not be won in Italy, but only by taking the fight directly to the enemy's heartland. First, he conquered Carthaginian Spain, severing Hannibal's supply lines and cutting off potential reinforcements. Then, against the cautious advice of the Senate, Scipio launched an invasion of North Africa. This move forced the Carthaginian Senate to recall Hannibal to defend his homeland. The final decisive battle came in 202 BC at Zama. Scipio, having studied Hannibal's tactics, outmaneuvered the Carthaginian general, crushing his army and securing a final Roman victory. Carthage was stripped of its empire, navy, and independence. Rome was now the dominant power in the West. The victory over Carthage unleashed Rome's full imperial potential. Now the Republic swiftly moved east, defeating the successor kingdoms of Alexander the Great Macedonia, the Seleucid Empire, and finally the Ptolemaic Kingdom of Egypt, though Egypt was annexed later. The East offered immense wealth, sophistication, and a vast influx of Greek culture and philosophy that fundamentally changed Roman society. Yet a stubborn hatred persisted among some Romans toward the humbled Carthaginians. The elder statesman Cato the Elder famously ended every Senate speech with the phrase, "Carthago delenda est, Carthage must be destroyed." In 149 BC, Rome provoked the Third Punic War. After a 3-year siege, Carthage was utterly destroyed, its population enslaved, and its very site symbolically plowed and salted, though the latter is historically debated. By 146 BC, with the destruction of both Carthage and the Greek city of Corinth, Rome had eliminated all major rivals. The Mediterranean Sea, once a contested waterway, was now bordered entirely by Roman territory. The Romans began to call it Mare Nostrum, our sea. The Republic, forged in iron and hardened by Punic fire, had achieved global supremacy, but its immense size and wealth would soon place unbearable strain on its governing institutions, leading to the collapse of its very political structure. Rome had conquered the world, but in doing so, it unleashed forces that would destroy its own republic. The immense wealth and slave labor pouring in from the conquered provinces created a chasm between the ruling elite optimates and the impoverished masses populares. Independent small farmers, along the backbone of the Roman army, could not compete with the massive slave-run latifundia, great estates owned by the Senate aristocracy. They lost their land, swelled the ranks of the urban poor proletarian Rome, and became disenfranchised, creating a deeply unstable social powder keg. The very institutions that had once secured liberty, the Senate, the assemblies, and the magistracies, were now paralyzed by greed and political deadlock. The first figures to truly grasp the depth of this social crisis were the Gracchi brothers, Tiberius and Gaius Sempronius Gracchus. Both were eloquent, reform-minded tribunes of the plebs, descended from one of Rome's most noble families. In 133 BC, Tiberius Gracchus used his tribunician power to propose a radical agrarian reform. Limits would be placed on the amount of public land an individual could hold, and the excess would be redistributed to the landless poor. This measure directly challenged the economic power of the Senate, who were the chief beneficiaries of the latifundia. When the Senate tried to block his reforms through parliamentary maneuvering, Tiberius took the unprecedented step of appealing directly to the people to dismiss a fellow tribune who opposed him. This act shattered the traditional conventions, mos meorum, of the Republic. The Senate responded not with law, but with lethal force. A mob led by the Pontifex Maximus, chief priest, brutally murdered Tiberius and hundreds of his followers on the Capitoline Hill. This was the first time that political debate in Rome was settled by mass bloodshed. A decade later, his younger brother, Gaius Gracchus, pursued an even more ambitious program of reform, including subsidized grain for the poor, public works, and the explosive proposal to extend full Roman citizenship to the Italian allies. The next phase of the crisis saw the militarization of politics, largely due to the revolutionary reforms of Gaius Marius, a novus homo new man from outside the traditional aristocracy. Marius became a successful general who needed soldiers for his campaigns in North Africa and against Germanic tribes. He broke with tradition and opened the army to the proletary, the landless urban poor. He promised them pay, spoils, and, most crucially, a plot of land upon retirement, thereby shifting the soldiers' primary loyalty from the Roman state to the individual general who promised to secure their future. This new military dynamic fueled the devastating civil wars between Marius and his protege, turned rival. Lucius Cornelius Sulla. When the Senate tried to replace Marius with Sulla as commander for the war against King Mithridates, Marius used his populist connections to seize the command back. In response, Sulla committed the unthinkable. In 88 BC, he marched his private army on Rome itself, a sacrilegious act that overturned centuries of civil law. After Sulla left for the east, Marius returned to seize power in a bloody purge. When Sulla finally returned victorious, he launched a brutal prescription, a published list of enemies who could be killed without trial, their property confiscated. Sulla declared himself dictator in an ancient office, but now without a time limit, and used his absolute power to enforce conservative, anti-populist reforms aimed at restoring the Senate's supremacy. Though Sulla voluntarily retired, his legacy was indelible. He had shown that an ambitious general, backed by a loyal army, could seize the Republic by force and legally dismantle its institutions. The Republic was now a hollow shell, its spirit broken. The only path to real power lay in military command. This led to the formation of the First Triumvirate in 60 BC, a secret, illegal alliance between the three most powerful men in Rome: Gnaeus Pompeius, Magnus Pompey, a brilliant general; Marcus Licinius Crassus, Rome's wealthiest man; and Gaius Julius Caesar, a charismatic politician and general eager for military glory. They pooled their power and resources, effectively sidelining the Senate. Caesar soon gained the command he desired, the governorship of Gaul. Over the next decade, he conquered the entirety of Gaul, amassing vast wealth, earning the fierce loyalty of his legions, and achieving renown that soon eclipsed both Crassus, who was killed in battle in 53 BC, and Pompey. The Senate, led by Pompey, who had now allied with them out of fear of Caesar, demanded that Caesar disband his army and return to Rome as a private citizen to face prosecution. In 49 BC, faced with ruin, Caesar led his 13th legion across the Rubicon River, the legal boundary separating his province from Italy, an act of explicit treason, declared. Alia iacta est, the die is cast. The act plunged the Republic into its final catastrophic civil war. Caesar swiftly defeated Pompey's forces across the Mediterranean. By 46 BC, Caesar stood as the undisputed master of the Roman world, eventually being declared dictator perpetuo, dictator for life. He implemented sweeping reforms, including a new calendar and land redistribution, ruling with a monarchical authority the Republic had been founded to prevent. The great colossus of the Republic had finally cracked, falling not to an external enemy, but to the overwhelming ambition of its own most successful son. The declaration of Julius Caesar as dictator perpetuo was the Republic's death sentence. But his assassination was the final tragic flourish. On the Ides of March 44 BC, a conspiracy led by Marcus Junius Brutus and Gaius Cassius Longinus struck Caesar down in the Senate House. They claimed to be acting as saviors of the Republic, but their bloody act only guaranteed its demise, triggering the last brutal cycle of civil wars. The time for Republican restoration was long past. The age of the strong man had arrived. The political vacuum left by Caesar's death was quickly filled by three men. First, Marcus Antonius, Mark Antony, Caesar's loyal, powerful general, who initially commanded the loyalty of Caesar's veterans. Second, Marcus Aemilius Lepidus, another powerful general. And third, and most surprisingly, Gaius Octavius, Caesar's 18-year-old adopted grandnephew and designated heir. Octavius, sickly but possessing a cold, calculating political mind, suddenly inherited Caesar's name, fortune, and immense political capital. In 43 BC, these three formed the Second Triumvirate, a formal, legal dictatorship unlike the secret First Triumvirate. Their immediate goal was revenge. They launched a second wave of horrific proscriptions far bloodier than Sulla's, executing thousands of opponents, including the renowned orator Cicero. The triumvirs then chased the assassins to Greece, where Antony and Octavian decisively defeated Brutus and Cassius at the Battle of Philippi. In 42 BC, the Republic's champions were vanquished, and the spoils of the Roman world were divided. As the dust settled, the triumvirate inevitably fractured. Lepidus was marginalized, leaving the world to be carved up by the two remaining giants, Antony in the east and Octavian in the west. Antony, a charismatic and somewhat hedonistic figure, established his base in Egypt, entering a famous and politically volatile relationship with Queen Cleopatra VII. He began to rely on Egyptian resources and adopted Eastern customs, granting Roman territories to his and Cleopatra's children. Octavian, meanwhile, shrewdly consolidated his power in Rome and Italy, meticulously cultivating the image of a traditional Roman patriot restoring order and piety. He launched a masterful propaganda campaign, portraying Antony as a weak, Orientalized tyrant who had fallen under the spell of a foreign queen and planned to transfer Rome's capital to Alexandria. The conflict was no longer framed as a civil war between two Roman generals, but as a righteous war for the defense of Rome in the west against an Eastern despotism. The final confrontation came on the sea. In 31 BC, Octavian's brilliant admiral, Marcus Vipsanius Agrippa, cornered the forces of Antony and Cleopatra at the Battle of Actium off the western coast of Greece. The battle was a resounding victory for Octavian. Antony and Cleopatra fled back to Egypt, where they were cornered a year later and committed suicide. Octavian annexed Egypt, adding the last great Hellenistic kingdom to the Roman domains. He was now at age 32, the sole and unchallenged ruler of the entire Mediterranean world. Octavian returned to Rome, but he understood the fate of his great uncle. The people were weary of war and chaos, but they still clung to the idea of the Republic. Octavian realized that to maintain power, he must appear to surrender it. In 27 BC, in a calculated political masterstroke, Octavian famously restored the Republic by officially relinquishing his extraordinary powers to the Senate and the people. The grateful Senate, in return, immediately bestowed upon him the title Augustus, meaning revered one or majestic, and granted him extraordinary power. This was the true beginning of the Roman Empire. Augustus cleverly disguised his dictatorship. He held multiple key republican offices simultaneously: consul, tribune, censor, pontifex, maximus, and, most importantly, maintained permanent imperium military command over the most crucial frontier provinces, ensuring the army remained loyal only to him. He was the princeps' first citizen, ruling not as a king or emperor in name, but as the supreme, unchallengeable authority who controlled the military, the finances, and the provinces. This system, known as the Principate, established the model for all future Roman emperors. Augustus's 40-year reign ushered in the Pax Romana Roman peace. Under his direction, the empire saw vast infrastructure projects, the establishment of efficient provincial governance, massive road building, the stabilization of the borders, and a cultural renaissance led by poets like Virgil and Horace. The violence and corruption of the late Republic gave way to order, prosperity, and stability. Rome was transformed from a troubled republic to a glorious empire, built upon the ruins of its own civil strife. Though the chains of freedom had been subtly slipped upon the people, they were gilded with gold and secured with an unprecedented era of peace. The reign of Augustus had planted the final, permanent seed of what would become the enduring Roman Empire.